Hey everybody, and welcome to another session of Control+M Presents. We're so glad you're here. As a reminder, we're recording this session, so you're all on mute. So when Amber opens up the floor to questions at the end of her presentation, you're just going to need to remember to unmute yourself. Today, our Amber Zancolli is going to be covering the Plex Bill and Hold features. Amber joined us last year and we couldn't be happier. She's a past president of the food and beverage user group, so she's got a really great deal of experience in the process industry, and she's been rapidly picking up on speed on the discrete side of things too. I don't want to spoil her session details, so go ahead, take it away, Amber, and let the folks on the call know all about Bill and Hold.
Thanks, Patty, and hello, everyone. I'm glad you can join us for this session on Bill and Hold in Plex. Here's a quick look at today's agenda. We're going to talk about the why, what, and how of Bill and Hold functionality in Plex, and then I'll give you a demo to show you how it works. We'll wrap up with some tips on using Bill and Hold and some time for your questions. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few terms. They are parts, items, supplies, and supply items. In discrete manufacturing, you usually refer to the things you sell, excuse me, or the things you consume in production to make the things you sell as parts. Well, in food and beverage and some other process manufacturing environments, you usually refer to these things as items. And as Patty said, because I work with customers in both discrete and food and beverage environments, I'm going to often use these terms interchangeably. In addition, you're going to see one of Control+M's PCNs in the demo that's configured for a food and beverage environment. So you're going to see the terms item and part interchangeably. Please note that in the presentation today, I will not be referring to parts or items that are, I will be referring to parts or items that are our serialized inventory only, not to be confused with supply items, supplies, or items that are not serialized. All right, let's start by defining what Bill and Hold is. Bill and Hold is an invoicing option in Plex UX. It allows you to bill your customers at the time of production instead of at the time of shipment. This allows for earlier revenue recognition ahead of shipping time. Your inventory that's produced becomes customer-owned at the time of invoicing and can then be held by the manufacturer for shipment based on agreed-upon terms. You can specify invoice generation frequency and whether Bill and Hold invoice lines are grouped by the job, the lot, or the part. You can also designate more than one parts as Bill and Hold, configuring this on an item-by-item basis using settings on the customer item code. You do not have to enable Bill and Hold for all items that you sell to a customer. It's assumed that any item identified as a Bill and Hold item is going to be sold to only one customer. The current release of Bill and Hold will not support the same item being sold to multiple customers. There may be plans to expand upon this, and this may be a good suggestion for the exchange. Once Bill and Hold is configured, the high-level process is as follows. You'll start with customer orders for Bill and Hold enabled items and create jobs to fulfill demand. You'll create jobs and complete production at the control panel, and then you'll generate your Bill and Hold invoices, either with a nightly job or on demand by batch or individual invoice. Then you'll ship to your customer when the agreed upon conditions are met. So I made that all sound pretty easy, but there are some limitations to Bill and Hold functionality. A Bill and Hold, again, supports only items sold to a single customer. So products manufactured for and sold to a single customer require that one-to-one relationship of internal part to customer part. If you use uploads for your customer items, you'll need to go in manually to enable them for Bill and Hold. This, again, would be a great suggestion for the exchange. And if you put it out there, we'll vote it up. Pricing has some specific conditions and limitations. Pricing is only accepted from the order line. So any items, charges, or details that you need included in your price need to be on that line. Again, with multiple line items, you need to use that same range for your breakpoints. And there's a quote here that's the specific text from Plex on pricing limitations. So we see that it precludes us from using catalog pricing or customer part pricing. I will say that in some of our testing, we were able to get some of these options to work. I would recommend referring to documentation, testing things out in your own PCN if you have complex pricing scenarios. No price breakdowns or price components are supported. There's some other impacts and requirements. Bill and hold requires the creation of jobs from orders or the linkage of jobs to sales orders at the job manager. Jobs that are not linked to an order can't be loaded to the control panel at the final operation. Again, there are pricing considerations, and you'll want to validate your pricing scenario is supported by bill and hold. In production, you're able to produce at the control panel as usual. However, you'll be producing to a specific container status. We'll take a look at that later on. It'll manage your actions available on inventory created, such as movement and shipping. Inventory that is produced to that container status will be excluded from your inventory valuation. It'll be included in your inventory, which is great because then you can manage it and have visibility, but it'll show up with a zero value with standard costing. And then with actual costing, it will be included on your inventory valuation with the zero value. SCAR will also have the addition of a bill and hold posting type, and there are some methods for handling scrap and adjustments where they won't be tied to the invoice if they're processed after invoice, since there is kind of a disconnect there between the shipment and the invoice. But those will be managed just with a bill and hold code. Again, with invoicing, we can schedule or invoice on demand. We do have those pricing requirements where the pricing at the time of invoice is the price that will show up on your invoice. And our print format for our invoice is a little bit different. We'll take a look at one of these, but you'll see that shipping information is not included on the invoice because we're invoicing ahead of ship time. So why would you use bill and hold with some of these requirements or limitations? Well, if you do co-packing, toll manufacturing, private label, or contract manufacturing, bill and hold still may be a great option for you. Because if you use something like a lot approval or require results of testing before shipping to your customer, or if they just request you to hold inventory on their behalf, bill and hold may be a good fit for you financially. The invoicing options allow you to recognize revenue ahead of shipping, still maintaining that visibility of inventory in your system. But COGS are recognized at production after invoicing, and then that inventory again holds a zero value on your balance sheet. The functionality here is designed to offer flexibility. So you can configure one or more of your parts for bill and hold, but you're not required to configure all parts for that customer as bill and hold. You can also configure that billing to group your items, your line items on your invoices by job, by part, or by lot. And you can do that on a part-by-part basis. To get bill and hold enabled in your PCN, you'll need to submit a case to Plex requesting that they enable the bill and hold functionality. Bill and hold is usually included in the base accounting module, but I would recommend following up with your CSM as needed for any questions about your subscription. To set up bill and hold, you'll configure the required settings and setup tables that we'll review. You'll then configure one or more of your customer items as bill and hold items, assigning an invoice grouping, and then you'll set the frequency for bill and hold invoice generation. The documentation in Plex is very strong on the topic of bill and hold. And if you have any questions when configuring this in your own environment, I recommend that in addition to rewatching this session and checking the documentation in Plex, you can find the documentation searching for bill and hold in the documentation platform. And for your ease, I have included a link with the path here. Feel free to take a screenshot to save for later. Here's a list of settings required for bill and hold. Again, take screenshots on any of these slides that you might want to refer to. You may notice that only one of these settings actually references bill and hold directly. Most of these settings belong to setting groups of other modules. And that's because as indicated in the impacts of Bill and Hold, the functionality of Bill and Hold depends on and interacts with other areas of Plex quite heavily. So be sure to read the details of these settings and give them a try and test to ensure that they won't break something else you do in Plex before you configure them in live. Please also note that while Bill and Hold functionality is only available in UX, hybrid customers can still print Bill and Hold invoices out of Classic. So that last setting you see there for partial containers pop-up is a Classic only setting. Now let's look at the setup tables, excuse me, and setup table entries required for Bill and Hold. If you don't see one of these setup tables available in your PCN, you may just need to add it. Here we have the part invoice option setup table, and this determines how invoice lines are grouped for your Bill and Hold enabled items. You'll see where we select from these options on the customer item screen later. When setting this up, you'll want to add one entry for each of the groupings, lot, job, and part. And this controls that detail again added to the invoice line. They're pretty simple setups with only those flags available. After adding your invoice groupings, you'll need to configure an invoice type for Bill and Hold invoices in the AR invoice type setup table. This manages the print formats for your various invoice types. You'll add an invoice type for Bill and Hold, selecting the invoice number prefix you desire. We've selected BH here for Bill and Hold. Add your invoice length, and then most importantly, select that Bill and Hold flag. Plex segregates Bill and Hold invoices based on this flag, and Bill and Hold invoices will automatically generate nightly or via the frequency you specify. And again, you can create those on demand in batch or individually. Bill and Hold uses a specific container status, and this is one of the keys that makes the Bill and Hold process work. Note, I'm showing this to you here, but you don't actually need to set up the Bill and Hold container status yourself. Plex will create this for you at the time you complete production of your first Bill and Hold enabled item at its final operation. Setting up a different status for finished Bill and Hold enabled parts or making changes to the Plex generated status can have unexpected consequences if the status is configured incorrectly. Please allow Plex to create this status for you at the time of production of your first Bill and Hold item. Let's take a closer look at this status. We'll notice that the container status name has underscores in it. The status does not allow ship. This is the status our inventory is in prior to being invoiced. Notice it's not an OK status, and this again helps limit what we can do with the uninvoiced Bill and Hold inventory. Bill and Hold itself is a system status. A system status can't be selected manually, such as on the container update form. Containers will only go into and out of these statuses as a result of system activity. Documentation states that the status is triggered by a system event, and statuses with the flag cannot be assigned or selected by users, such as in drop-down and filters. And there's even a control panel setting that excludes system statuses from showing up in the control panel as container statuses in that drop-down. Now, the Bill and Hold status will still work properly on the control panel, but again, it's not something a user can choose to select. We won't cover these optional configurations today, but I did want to make you aware of a few of these options. You can use Bill and Hold with EDI invoicing. You will need to set up an EDI mailbox to handle your Bill and Hold invoices, and that mailbox has to be used specifically for your Bill and Hold invoices. It requires an EDI document format or template that is compatible with Bill and Hold. To use Bill and Hold with commissions, enable the setting for Bill and Hold within the commission setting group. And this will add a filter and a column on the commissions owed screen and visibility of the Bill and Hold status on commission owed form. There are also notifications for Bill and Hold. A notification is available in the email notification manager for Bill and Hold errors. And this sends a notification if there's an error on the invoice creation due to missing information on the customer order. You can refer to the Plex documentation for any additional information on these configurations. Now we'll get into our demo. For our live demo, I'll show you the configuration of customer items as Bill and Hold parts. Again, you'll hear me using those terms, parts and items, pretty interchangeably. We'll create a sales order jobs linked to our order, and we'll complete production at the control panel. Then we'll create our bill and hold invoices, and we'll review inventory along the way so that you can see the changes to container status at steps of that bill and hold process. We'll take a look at the invoice and then ship to our customer. So here I am at the items screen, just filtering for the items that I have configured for bill and hold. These are pretty simple items, and for simplicity in the demonstration today, I am using items that just have a single routing and very simplified BOMs. And we know that that's not typical, but to keep the focus on the bill and hold process, we wanted to simplify for you today, save you from having to watch me make a ton of clicks. Once we've got bill and hold configured as far as our settings and setup tables, we go to our customer items and enable them for bill and hold. Here are two items that I've enabled for bill and hold. I'm going to drill into the customer item or customer part detail form here. Note that I've linked them to my specific customer and selected the item and given it a customer item number. Once we enable the bill and hold functionality, we see this bill and hold, this accounting section here with the bill and hold option and our invoice options, where we can select to do by job, lot, or part. Again, as we configured in our part invoice option table. Now we'll enter our sales orders. I'm going to go ahead and just create an order for a couple of those items. And you'll note here I'm using customer item picker to make sure I'm getting those items that are appropriate for this customer. And Plex is going ahead and pulling the last paid price, and that's the price that I entered just on the sales order line here. Now that I've created my sales orders, I'm going to go ahead and create my jobs that are linked to my sales orders. And I can do that a couple different ways. I've enabled a setting here so that I can click on create jobs in the action bar to be taken directly to create jobs from orders screen. I could additionally add a job in the job manager and then link it to my sales order. Here I'm filtering for items or parts for this specific customer. So I've filtered by the description, starting with just soup. And I can see all of the lines that are from sales orders that are eligible for me to create jobs. I'm going to go ahead and select them all and click create jobs. Note that create jobs from orders won't schedule your batch production jobs. Typically, you'll use it to create your simplified production or other production of your finished good item. And then you can use your other planning methods, either PRP or Demandcaster, to schedule those batch jobs of the sub-assemblies. Here you see I've created 4 jobs. We'll take a look at our job dispatch. And we see we have all those jobs scheduled to one work center. This is where we're making all our soup today. We'll go ahead and just verify that we don't have any inventory of soup in the system right now. So let's go ahead and produce some. So I'm at the control panel here. Again, your control panel may be set up a little bit differently than ours. In this scenario, our work center has been configured to use shared source and to keep source loaded in between job changes. You can see that I'm logged in already because we assume that I've been making production all day. I'm going to go ahead and select my job and select my work center status and click into record production. Again, my inventory is already loaded here. If for some reason my work center status weren't a production status, I can always click right here in that status to change it directly without having to go back to the main control panel page. Notice here that we see a status that my production is going to be moved into. So for the most part, right, the control panel situation or scenario looks very similar. Your operators aren't going to notice a huge difference, except for this status that they'll be producing to. And I don't have an option of selecting a different status. And this is configured by the bill and hold configuration on our customer item. I'm going to go ahead and produce these in 5,000 a piece here and just record production so that we can speed through. You might notice that I wait a moment just to make sure that that production of that prior container can be completed. Whenever we're doing our tests, we're producing in Plex at a rate that is probably not exactly mirroring the production of our actual ability to produce. So we like to give Plex a little bit of time to make sure it catches up. So I produced my item that was just soup, and that was a standard simplified production. I'm going to go ahead now and produce my soup supreme. Notice I didn't unload the work center. I'm just going ahead and switching through, and that's based on our configuration. When I go to record production here, this screen is going to look a little different. You see here that you have an option for a lot number. Because we're working in food and beverage, most of our production is going to be lot enabled. And this is using lot management in UX. Lot management is not required to use bill and hold, but it is supported by it. So to complete my production, I'm going to go ahead and click on lot number and assign my lot. That lot number is assigned using a predefined format that we have created and associated with our item as we made it lot enabled. Again, we're going to produce to this bill and hold status. I'm going to record production. And I can see here by looking at my current production that my production is completing to those containers to a bill and hold status. Great. So now we'll sneak on through and we'll take a look at our inventory. So we see now, right, that we do have some soup in the system. We've produced these 4 containers. We can see the job number that they're associated with, the lot number for the lot enabled items, and we see the manufacture date because using lot management, we also use the ship life, which is, our best by, use by, sell by. You can see the location of production and that status of bill and hold. We'll go ahead and drill into one of those containers and look at the container history there. And here you'll see that, again, the container was created, the control panel, as it usually would be, and it was created into that bill and hold status. Remember, we'll come back and take a look at this in a moment. Since we've completed our production, we're going to go ahead and go into our bill and hold invoicing. I'm filtering here based on my customer. You could filter for a specific PO or item, a status of whether or not this bill and hold invoice had been completed, or a specific serial number. I can see the production that I completed for those sales orders, the containers, the items I produced, and those quantities. Now here's where we can manage our invoice generation frequency. You'll see that here. I'll click into that. This is going to be the number of days, every number of days since the last run date that our automatic invoice generation is run. Now, this is a nightly job that processes around 1 in the morning Eastern, and it will invoice any of the bill and hold invoices that are eligible for invoicing. Using the automatic generation won't allow any filtering. It will just invoice whatever's ready to be invoiced. So a lot of times we'll see customers that don't use this. They'll put this at a far number of days out, like I have for 800, so that instead of having Plex automatically generate those invoices for them, they can come in. Maybe they want to make sure, especially if they're invoicing by job, that the job has been completed, that they have all the quantities accounted for prior to invoicing. your business process is going to dictate your decision on your frequency and your method. Note that if I were to click this Generate Invoice button, regardless of the filters I have here, I'm going to get a message from Plex indicating that all of the invoices that are eligible are again going to be invoiced. If you instead want to invoice, instead of batch, if you want to invoice individual invoices, you'll just select the row for the PO number, click on View, and now you can see just those lines. And here you could click on Generate Invoice in the action bar to create those bill and hold invoices. Now we're back at that bill and hold invoice screen. I'm going to go ahead and click Generate Invoices again in the action bar, which would invoice any eligible invoices or orders. And now when we refresh that and we look for invoice no, we don't see those order lines. But when we say yes, we can see all of our history of bill and hold invoice generation. So let's take a look now again at our inventory and see what happened. When we created those bill and hold invoices, Plex automatically adjusted our system status, moving those into an OK status. If we revisit that serial number that we looked at a moment ago and look at our container history, we see now that that status has changed to OK and that it was updated. Here we go. Let's look at our bill and hold invoices and take a look at what those invoices look like. I'm going to select one of those that's not yet printed. And we can see here the information that is by our serial number and our lot number, because this is a lot enabled item. We can see that it's going to invoice that in one line of distribution. See our invoice amount there. Your terms and other financial information is going to come just straight from the customer record. We'll go ahead and print that invoice. Let me zoom a little bit here. So you'll see here that in the invoice, it looks a little different than our other invoice, right? And this is being managed by that bill and hold flag on the AIR invoice setup table. We see our prefix of BH for our bill and hold invoice, and we see order information and bill to. We don't have any shipping information. Additionally, we see produced quantity instead of shipped quantity. And that makes sense because we haven't shipped it yet. So that information isn't available. Here again, we reference those lines that we saw in the distribution. We see the quantity, the serial numbers, and lot information. So once we've invoiced and we've held our inventory for an amount of time agreed upon, maybe we've gotten our lot test results back or our test results back that we've sent to our customer and they are satisfied and they've requested us to ship, then we'll just ship normally here. I'm just refreshing my customer releases and scheduling screen. You may use truck shipping. In this environment, I'm going to be using customer shipping. I'm going to go ahead and schedule those 2 lines that I have inventory for. Let's just ship them today. We'll go to our customer shipping screen. And so here is our scheduled shipper. We'll go ahead and load these containers. Oops, sorry about that. Luckily, Plex won't let me load it twice. Oh, I see what I've done. Luckily, Plex also won't let me overship. I got a little excited with that one. Let's go ahead and Unload some of those. One moment while we find our inventory here. Receiving doc, we're here. Oh, why aren't we seeing you? Well, if we can't find it, we will show you those that I shipped already. Let's see here. So I'll go ahead and instead really quickly so that you don't have to hang on with me here. We'll go to our customer shipping history. And you can see those shipments that I did just a little while ago. And when we look at these shipments, we see they're in a shipped status, and we could see our document history. This is just going to be our standard shipping documents. The difference here is that when I would have clicked that ship button for you, these shipping documents would have been generated, but another invoice will not have been. And you can see that because in our invoices here, we only have one of those per each of those shipments. And you can see that I've referenced the customer PO number on my AR invoice screen, as well as those order numbers. In this particular instance, we had one order that we invoiced separately, right? So we had an invoice per part or per item. We completed production of 3 serial numbers on a job. We invoiced ahead of waiting for those second production run to be completed. And then once we completed that second production, we invoiced again. So now we'll get back to the presentation. After invoicing, when generating those bill and hold invoices, there are some reasons why you may not see your invoice lines. You want to make sure that you have the bill and hold flag enabled on your customer item, and you want to make sure you select an invoice grouping from the dropdown. If you only check that checkbox to enable the item for bill and hold and don't select a grouping, you may just get a blank invoice without any lines. If you find that you're unable to load a job at the control panel, make sure you check your job and verify that the job is linked to a customer order. If needed, you can create jobs from orders, or you can create your job or link your job at the job manager if you already created your job using another method. Again, orders must be associated with jobs, or jobs must be associated with orders for them to be loaded at the control panel. If you find you're unable to ship, check the inventory container status. If changes have been made to that bill and hold status in our container status setup table, you may have to restore the status to the Plex generated setting. Refer to the documentation in Plex or that screenshot you took of the slideshow to verify that your status has the correct flags enabled. If your inventory is in a bill and hold status, verify that you've generated your bill and hold invoice prior to shipping. If you're unable to print a bill and hold invoice, make sure you haven't added pricing methods that are unsupported. In working on this presentation, we actually tried out a few various pricing methods that we knew weren't supported just to see what would happen. And we were able to get pretty far through the process, but when we attempted to print the invoice, Plex wasn't able to generate that invoice because it wasn't able to process the pricing. So again, When you're configuring initially, make sure that your pricing methods are supporting by reading the documentation and using test. There are some additional limitations that I will suggest that you refer to in the documentation, but I will detail here. And they are that in addition to jobs being linked to orders, jobs cannot be merged because jobs must be linked to only one release per order line for that single customer item. So merging jobs not supported, but job splits are functional with bill and hold. We talked a lot about the pricing requirements. How about Kanban? Well, because our sales order is linked to the production at the final operation, Kanban scheduling is incompatible with job setup at that operation. But you can use Kanban for your prior operations and then use simplified production for your final op. Unshipping is not supported. And the reason there is because when you create your bill and hold invoice, you haven't shipped yet. So your shipping is actually disconnected from the invoice. So if you attempt to unship a bill and hold shipper, it just doesn't void the invoice as it does for a non-bill and hold shipper. There are some additional requirements for production correction as well that may not be compatible with bill and hold. You may read about those in the documentation for production corrections. If you produce companion or multi-out parts, bill and hold may not be supported. Bill and hold will support dynamic multi-outs, but not traditional multi-outs. As we mentioned earlier, scrap and inventory adjustments that occur after bill and hold are not automatically accounted for. And that's because the invoice generation has occurred prior to the scrap or adjustment. In those cases, you'll have to manually correct your invoices. There is some information in the documentation about invoice modification. Partial containers are not supported as well. If you want to do rework with bill and hold, just make sure you have the settings indicated in the documentation to restore original job on approval. And what that'll do is it'll make sure that that rework job can still be associated with the original order. Thank you again for joining me while we reviewed bill and hold in Plex. We went over what bill and hold is, some reasons why you may use it, and I showed you the settings and setup tables required to configure bill and hold. We did a quick demo, and now it's time for your questions.
Thanks, Amber. I just want to remind everybody that you are on mute. So if you do have questions, make sure you hit the unmute button. And then Amber, I'm gonna take over sharing my screen here, if you don't mind. There's a very important rollout at Plex right now that I want to talk about with everybody here.
Not at all. Thank you.
Are you seeing my screen now?
Yes.
A screen that has Plex on it?
With the transition to pin message with the community.
Yes, good. Thank you. For some reason, I don't have that red border. So I just wanted to let everybody know, by the way, Amber, thank you very much. I appreciate the time that you put into explaining this function. Before I move on to our next session, I want to point out a change that's happening with user IDs on hybrid PCNs. Patty P, I see that you're on this call. This does not impact you. But for anyone who is either on Classics, that you started on Classic and you're either still on Classic or you've transitioned, or anyone who started on UX before June 2020 or so, the easiest way to tell if you're in hybrid is if you log into www.plexonline, that type of thing, or cloud.plex.com. Anyway, if you do and you have any password validation set for check sheets or production time clock, you're going to need to take a look at this notice about pin verification. Without getting too into the specifics, here's an explanation of what you need to do to make it happen. But if you are, for example, one of those customers that say, I'm going to be able to record production, but then force a password to validate production, any check sheets, any of these items, the password validation is going away the third week of the month. So we recommend for you to take a look at this link here and look at these instructions. It's pretty easy. I'll show you what I did. I turned on a setting in in my user manager here where there's now a field in here for PIN. And there's also a report out here called user PIN configuration. So you can see that right now I'm the only one who's actually created the PIN in my company. So we'll be monitoring that. The community basically says it's set up to make this change by the 3rd week of September, which is coming up pretty quickly, unfortunately. So recommend that you set this up in your test database, test, and then train your users because their lives are going to change a little bit as this rolls out. Finally, we're going to talk about our next session. It's in the process of being scheduled. I was going to do it September 20th, but we have 2 go lives in the next 4 weeks, and I just got called to an offsite meeting that day by Plex. So keep an eye on your email for the exact date. Christopher Marks is going to be talking about part specifications and control plans, which is, really one of the most powerful and frequently used features in Plex. I'll be posting this video today on our YouTube channel. Please don't forget to check out our content and like and share our videos. And thank you so much for the gift of your time today. Hope everyone stays healthy. Great job, Amber. Appreciate you explaining this so well. Take care and stay healthy.